Whenever I say that Nissim Ezekiel is a Bombay poet, that he was born in Bombay, that he lived in Bombay, that he wrote about Bombay, that he loved Bombay, that he died in Bombay, though by that time the city had been renamed as Mumbai, I feel like bringing in another Bombay poet, a much more famous Bombay poet, a poet who was, like Nissim Ezekiel, born in Bombay and who lived for some time in Bombay, who wrote about Bombay, and who was the first English language writer to be awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature, Rudyard Kipling. Let me try to remember a few lines from Rudyard Kipling's famous ode to the city of Bombay. I quote, "Mother of cities to me, for I was born in her gate, between the palms and the sea, where the world-end steamers wait." Unquote. The crucial difference between the attitude of Nissim Ezekiel and the attitude of Rudyard Kipling towards Bombay is that Nissim Ezekiel's attitude is not uncritical. He is not blind to the ills of the city. He is keenly aware of the negative aspects of the city. He loves the city, of course, but accepts that the city has more than its share of faults. Rudyard Kipling's love for Bombay, as intense as that of Nissim Ezekiel, is rather uncritical, rather unconditional. He refuses to see the negative aspects of the city. He loves the city unquestioningly and tries to glorify it without questioning whether the glorification has any sufficient factual foundation. Let us take a close look at the stylistic component of minority poem. Nissim Ezekiel was responsible for bringing the free verse revolution to Indian literature, and there is nobody who can match him in the manipulation of the nuances of free verse. At the same time, Nissim Ezekiel is the master of traditional verse. He used to state that he would be ashamed to say that he could not write traditional verse. It was like a painter saying that he could not draw. It was absurd. The master of free verse was also the master of traditional verse. That precisely is the problem when it comes to atomizing and evaluating the stylistic component of minority poem. Is it a free verse poem or a poem in traditional verse? Let us try to find out. At first blush, it appears to be a poem in traditional verse. The poem consists of 30 lines, organized in 10 stanzas of 3 lines each. The linear length is more or less uniform, and the tercets give the impression that the poem is a poem in traditional verse. However, the presence of a regular stanzaic pattern by itself is not sufficient to make the poem under consideration a full-blown traditional verse poem. Let us find out what the meter is. What is the meter used by the poet here? Metrical analysis of the poem reveals that the poet has used iambic trimeter. But the problem is that the meter is not consistently used. At best, we can say that there is the ghost of a meter, the ghost of iambic trimeter in the lines. Let us consider whether the poem uses a regular rhyme scheme. The poem does not have a regular rhyme scheme, but the poet occasionally uses rhyme to generate a special effect. For example, in stanza 7, the first line and the last line rhyme with each other. Thus, you can say that the rhyme scheme used is A, B, A, but the rhyme is only half rhyme. Similarly, in the penultimate stanza, the first line rhymes with the last line. So you can say that the stanza uses the rhyme scheme A, B, A, and in this case, it is not half rhyme but full rhyme. However, the occasional use of rhyme is not sufficient to support the case, to buttress the case that the poem under consideration is a poem in traditional verse. I think it would be quite safe to arrive at the conclusion that minority poem is a poem which utilizes elements from free verse as well as from traditional verse. In the poem, we find a brilliant fusion of elements from free verse and traditional verse. The poem has a regular stanzaic pattern. The poem has a meter, but the meter is not consistently used. The poem does not have a regular rhyme scheme, but occasionally the poem uses rhyme in order to generate a special effect. The poem derives much of its strength from its comprehensive use of symbolism. In fact, this symbolism lies at the foundation of the structure of the poem. The speaker in the poem is very much the speaker, but he is also a symbol. He symbolizes the religious minorities of India, while his guests, who are also guests on one level, symbolize the religious majority of India. The poem makes use of very appropriate use of allusion. In stanza 7, there is an allusion to one of the most famous passages in the Bible, in the New Testament. The allusion is to the passage in which Jesus says that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to go to heaven. Matthew 19:24. The poem makes very effective use of figures of speech such as hyperbole and synecdoche. In the last line of the poem, the hyperbole that the city burns is used. Of course, the city does not burn. The poet is only exaggerating when he says that the city burns. Similarly, the language in stanza 4 is language, just language, plain and simple. But it also stands for something much more than language itself, for the entire sensibility, for the entire approach, the entire attitude, for the entire way in which the individual organizes reality, categorizes reality, evaluates reality, and understands reality. Thus, language is a synecdoche. The average number of words per line is something like 4 or something between 4 and 5, and the average number of words per stanza is something like 13. And when you are asked to carry out a stylistic analysis of the poem, you must remember to discuss briefly at least the title of the poem. I've already spoken about the title in an earlier class. I've already pointed out that the title is carefully chosen so as to emphasize one part of the title, the first part of the title, the first half of the title, in order to stress the word minority. The title is carefully chosen, is framed carefully in such a manner that the word minority is emphasized